Anne Boleyn is arguably Henry VIII's most famous wife, and while her exact birth date is unknown, it most likely occurred around 1501 in Norfolk, England. Anne was born to Sir Thomas Boleyn, a nobleman and well-respected diplomat, and noblewoman Elizabeth Howard. Throughout her lifetime, Anne gained a reputation as a well-educated, confident and passionate woman who captured the attention of King Henry VIII. As such, Anne has been accused of plotting to take the English throne and orchestrating the alleged murder of the former Queen Catherine of Aragon. However, these claims are unsubstantiated, and when weighed with evidence, it can be concluded that Anne's story as a cunning vixen and adulteress has been substantially misinterpreted. Anne's childhood was spent in Norfolk alongside her elder sister Mary and younger brother George. In 1505 her family migrated to Kent. Anne received the standard education for noble girls at the time, which would have included literacy, household management, sewing, dancing and music lessons. It is understood that George was offered a more comprehensive education, which included languages, but it is possible that Anne shared some of his knowledge. In 1512, Thomas Boleyn visited the prestigious Austrian court, fostered an exceptional reputation with the royal family, and secured Anne's position as a maid of honour to Queen Margaret. The Austrian court was renowned for its culture, humanism, and educational opportunities, and as such, positions were sought after and difficult to obtain. These positions were typically defaulted to the eldest daughter. However, there is no record of why Thomas chose Anne over Mary. It has been argued that Anne was the more intelligent and extroverted of the two. It should be noted that in the 16th century, it was commonplace for noble children to be sent to other noble households in order to garner an education, as parents were deemed ill-fitted to properly educate their own children. In 1513, Anne was dispatched to Austria. During her time at court, Anne was exposed to a variety of educated and diverse individuals or their works, such as Erasmus, Aesop, and Jan van Eyck, to name a few. Furthermore, she was tutored in French by someone named Simonet. It should be noted that the education of the maids was dependent on the interests and background of the Queen. As such, Anne was offered a sophisticated education in art, music, poetry, literature, dance and philosophy, which surpassed the learning of most young girls of the time. Anne was regarded by Queen Margaret as a pleasant, intelligent and well-rounded young woman. Anne served the luxurious court with rigour for less than 2 years until she was recalled by her father in 1514 in order to attend Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, on her journey and subsequent marriage to Louis XII. The marriage didn't last long, as Louis passed away 3 months later due to suspected ailments involved in his gout. He was succeeded by Francis I, who married his young cousin and Duchess of Brittany, Claude. In 1515, Anne and her sister Mary became attendants to the new Queen Claude. It is believed that Anne operated as a translator during English affairs, inclusive of the famous Field of Cloth of Gold in 1520, where Henry VIII and Francis I met in order to establish and improve English-French relations. In 1519, Mary was recalled to England, where she served as maid of honour to Queen Catherine of Aragon. It has been argued that Mary was involved in a quiet affair with King Francis I, which damaged her reputation. However, there is no concrete evidence of this. It should be noted that Mary was involved in a confirmed affair with Henry VIII in the early 1520s, and it was argued that he fathered at least one of her children. However, Henry never acknowledged them, and Mary's husband, William Carey, was formally acknowledged as their father. It is important to understand that this was not an attempt by the Boleyns to usurp the well-respected Queen Catherine. If it was, the married Mary, with her damaged reputation, would never have been accepted as a royal bride. In 1522, Anne returned to England to marry James Butler, the 9th Earl of Ormond. The betrothal fell through and she became a maid of honour to Queen Catherine. She was reunited with Mary and George as the three partook in the Chateau Vert dance in York Palace, and she played the role of Perseverance. During this time, her father received a promotion and enjoyed an excellent reputation at court. It is important to understand that there is no indication that Anne was plotting against Catherine, or that she sought a romantic relationship with the king. In 1523, Anne fell in love with a young nobleman named Henry Percy. The relationship escalated to a betrothal. However, the match was declined by Cardinal Wolsey and by order of the king. Debate about whether or not the betrothal was consummated would later cause substantial problems for Anne and Henry's marriage. This, however, is clear indication that Anne intended to marry a nobleman and did not seek the throne. Anne was subsequently banished to Hever Castle in 1524. By early 1525, Anne had returned to court and captured the attention of King Henry. Anne was regarded by her contemporaries as spirited, fashionable, extroverted, and pious, and her presence made a substantial impression on the English court. She caught the attention of a court poet, Thomas Wyatt. This relationship never became romantic and is often reported as one-sided on the part of Wyatt. It is worth noting that the king's marriage had become strained, mostly due to their lack of a male heir and Catherine's declining fertility. Catherine was 7 years older than Henry and had begun to show signs of menopause. Catherine and Henry unfortunately suffered many miscarriages, and a number of their children passed in infancy. The primary role of the Queen was to produce heirs, and as such her body was property of the state. Although Henry had fathered a son with his former mistress, Bessie Blount, his illegitimacy made him ineligible to inherit the throne. Henry's sole heir at this time was Princess Mary. Moreover, Henry's father's claim to the throne was shaky, and throughout his reign, Henry faced increasing threat from foreign powers. His lack of an heir created substantial instability to the Tudor reign. However, England was staunchly Catholic, and divorce was virtually unheard of. However, it is important to understand that there was no intent to set aside the Queen at this point. In 1526, his interest in Anne became public knowledge. By 1527, Henry had sent Anne numerous letters and repeatedly attempted to convince her to become his mistress, which she refused. Anne was pious, hoped to make a good marriage, and understood that an affair with the king had not brought great fortune upon her sister. Some have argued that Anne intentionally refused Henry in order to seize the throne. However, there is no evidence to suggest this was the case. Moreover, it's important to note that affairs were not uncommon, but premarital relations would cause serious damage to a young woman's reputation. A good reputation was everything to noble girls, and a damaged reputation could result in a few, if no marriage prospects, and subsequent social decline. Anne was a vibrant, intelligent and popular woman. Her portrait survives and depicts a young woman with a long, narrow face, small dark eyes, an olive complexion and dark hair, which did not fit the fair-skinned, fair-haired beauty standards of the time, and was frequently remarked upon. Nevertheless, Anne was charming, entertaining, and regarded as a fashionable trendsetter. Her sophistication and advanced education truly set her apart from the English ladies. Henry had fallen in love with Anne, but realised he would not convince her to become his mistress, and that year set out to have his marriage annulled, citing a Bible passage that claimed it was a sin to marry his brother's wife, and the indiscretion would leave them childless. Henry argued that their inability to produce a male heir counted as childlessness. It should be noted that Catherine was brought to England in the early 16th century in order to marry Henry's elder brother, Arthur. Catherine maintained that her youthful marriage had not been consummated, and that Arthur had been unhealthy and passed away before they could. Henry had obtained a dispensation from the Pope to marry her. Unfortunately, by order of the Spanish king, Charles V, troops laid siege to Rome and forced the Pope to flee, which caused a serious delay in the annulment. At this time the Pope was akin to a prisoner of Charles. It should be noted that Charles was Catherine of Aragon's nephew, and this offered substantial protection to Catherine's cause. What's more, Catherine was a popular, well-respected queen with an impeccable reputation, in contrast to the Boleyn family with the disgraced Mary and rumours that Anne had become another of Henry's mistresses. As a result, Henry's petition to the Pope for annulment was declined, and his marriage, much to Catherine's joy, was deemed legitimate. The problem of his marriage to Catherine became known as the King's Great Matter. It is important to understand the religious climate of the time. Tudor England was staunchly Catholic and remained relatively untouched by the continental Protestant reforms. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of a local church. He accused the Catholic Church of corruption. Most notable was his criticism of the sale of indulgences, which were papers said to help reduce the time a departed soul spent in purgatory. Protestant ideas in certain circumstances permitted divorce. Anne was exposed to reform during her time on the continent, and although she was a Catholic, was inspired by the movement. Additionally, Anne's strong influence over Henry was well known. Unable to take Anne as his mistress and unable to secure a divorce from the Pope, Henry turned to reform for solutions. There is a common misconception that Tudor women in their 30s were considered elderly or would experience menopause. Despite the drastically shorter average lifespan compared to the modern day, many Tudor women remained fertile until around 50. For much of society, the average age of marriage was in the late 20s, although royal children often married younger and were sometimes kept apart until they were mature enough to consummate their vows. Therefore, contrary to popular belief, Anne was not regarded as a desperate elderly bride. However, she was aware that her chances of producing at least one male heir diminished for every year she was kept waiting for the annulment. This pressure was felt by Henry, who was 41 years old and eager to secure the Tudor reign. It is clear that Anne was well aware of what it would take in order to marry Henry. However, her love for Henry was genuine and was not simply a tactic to seize the throne. Anne faced substantial backlash from members of the court and public. She was regarded as a mistress and accused of having a damaged reputation. At this time, Anne's family enjoyed greater court favours. Her father was promoted to the Earl of Wiltshire, and her brother George was gifted his father's former title of Viscount Rochford when he was knighted in 1529. George was a known womaniser and regularly cheated on his wife Jane Parker. Anne's family supported the relationship and would have encouraged her to hold out for marriage. However, this does not mean that Anne had been previously conditioned to replace Catherine. Moreover, in 1530, after failing to secure an annulment, Henry's former favourite, Cardinal Wolsey, was arrested for treason. However, he died during the journey to face trial. This is evidence to the desperation of Henry and Anne to secure an annulment. In 1531, Henry appointed Thomas Cromwell as the royal adviser. Cromwell was a Puritan and deeply sympathetic to the Reform movement. In contrast to Henry, he desired the removal of Catholicism from the English Church. Cromwell would play a crucial role in the rise of Anne Boleyn and other reformers. In July of 1531, Henry formally exiled Catherine and forced her to move between properties far from court. What's more, he banned her from contact with their daughter Princess Mary, who was a staunch sympathiser and ally of her mother. It is important to understand that Anne was complicit in the mistreatment of Mary, and it has been argued that she actively attempted to stop Henry from spending quality time with his once beloved daughter. Additionally, it has been argued that during the trip to France in late 1532, Anne and Henry consummated their relationship. If this is true, it is likely that the couple were informally or privately betrothed. Moreover, and impatient and unable to rid himself of the popular pious Catherine, Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn in a private ceremony in 1533. It is important to understand that his marriage to Catherine was valid that January, and therefore his marriage to Anne was bigamous. Additionally, it is worth noting that Henry confessed to his relationship with Mary Boleyn at this time, as he required a dispensation in order to marry Anne. Moreover, impatient and unable to rid himself of the popular pious Catherine, Henry secretly married Anne Boleyn in a private ceremony in 1533. It is important to understand that his marriage to Catherine was valid, and therefore his marriage to Anne was bigamous. Additionally, it is worth noting that Henry confessed to his relationship with Mary Boleyn in the 1520s, as he required a dispensation in order to marry Anne. After many years of waiting, on the 23rd of May, 1533, Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon was formally annulled by Archbishop Cranmer. Subsequently, on the 28th of May, his marriage to Anne was declared valid. However, this did not guarantee support from the subject courtiers or foreign powers, as many regarded his marriage to Catherine legitimate due to the Pope's continued refusal to grant a divorce. The annulment also rendered the Princess Mary illegitimate, as Henry argued his marriage to Catherine had never been valid. On the 1st of June, Anne was crowned Queen of England at Westminster Abbey. Anne was approximately 6 months pregnant at this time. It should be noted that betrothed couples were often permitted and sometimes encouraged to have intercourse in order to secure their bond. On the 7th of September 1533, at the Palace of Placentia in Greenwich, the future Elizabeth I was born. As the eldest legitimate child of Henry and Anne, she was presumed heir until the birth of a male child. However, the birth of another daughter came as a disappointment. Although it provided evidence that Henry and Anne were capable of producing healthy children, it is likely that Elizabeth's birth distressed Anne, as the failure to produce a son was the undoing of Catherine, and with so much scrutiny and condemnation of their marriage, Anne was well aware that this would not have been regarded as a sign from God that his marriage to Catherine had been illegitimate. It should be noted that Henry doted on his younger daughter, who spoke highly of him throughout her life. His treatment of Mary, however, was abysmal. She remained barred from seeing and communicating with her mother, removed as heir to the throne, and dispatched to serve in Elizabeth's household under the title of the Lady Mary. Mary had been opposed to Anne Boleyn and openly expressed her disdain and even refused to acknowledge her sister. Moreover, Mary was a proud Catholic, and although she admitted she was unable to refuse her father's wishes, she objected to his marriage with Anne Boleyn. In 1534 the Act of Supremacy passed through Parliament and Henry formally declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. This resulted in England's break with Rome. This was a dangerous move as the annulment and subsequent rejection of the Pope's authority caused serious friction between England and continental powers. Many abroad or away from court criticised or openly opposed his marriage to Anne. Furthermore, 1534 would bring unfortunate news for Anne and Henry, as Anne suffered at least one miscarriage. It is possible she also suffered a false pregnancy. These were not uncommon during this period, as the pressure on women, especially royal women, to produce sons was astronomical. However, it is important to understand that miscarriage and stillbirth were common in this period and not usually a cause for concern. It should be noted that 1534 was a relatively peaceful year for their relationship. Anne's famous medal, including her motto, "The Most Happy," was manufactured. By all accounts, Henry and Anne were content in their relationship. Famously, they had a number of passionate arguments throughout the relationship, but made up soon after. Throughout her reign, Anne paid significant attention to educational reform and assisting Henry with the progression of the Reformation. It has been argued that Anne was the catalyst for Reformation in England. However, it is important to understand that Anne and Henry both remained Catholic, and reformational ideas emerged on the continent in the previous century. Anne was by no means the only person at court who understood reform. Furthermore, Anne's friendship with Cromwell fell into disrepair when he organised the money gathered from the dissolution of the monasteries to be defaulted to the crown. Anne argued that the money should be used for charitable services. It wasn't until 1536 that things would take a turn for the worst. On the 7th of January, Henry and Anne are reported to have rejoiced over the death of the ailing Catherine of Aragon at Kimbolton Castle. This was regarded as the final legitimisation of their marriage. However, on the 29th of January, Anne suffered the stillbirth of a male child of approximately 4 months gestation. This caused great distress and suffering to the King and Queen. Henry is quoted as saying, "I see God will not give me male children." It has been argued that this was the beginning of Anne's downfall, as Henry had sought attention from other ladies at court, most notably the young and pious Jane Seymour. However, there is no evidence that he intended to set aside another queen at this point. Furthermore, such a move would be risky, as he went to great lengths to secure his marriage to Anne. It wasn't until late April that, upon hearing rumours of infidelity and inappropriate conduct, that Cromwell turned the tide against Anne and quietly began to collect testimonies which corroborated these stories. On the 1st of May, Cromwell presented his findings to King Henry, who, disappointed and enraged, ordered Anne's arrest. Such accusations would have damaged Henry's reputation and humiliated him in the eyes of his enemies. Anne was known for her fiery temper, passionate nature, and extroversion, which went against the expected behaviour for a woman of her time. This risked Henry's concept of masculinity and, combined with their inability to produce an heir, further condemned Anne. On the 2nd of May 1536, Anne was arrested and transported by barge to the Tower of London. She attempted to convince Henry of her innocence. However, Henry refused to see her. This came as a major shock to much of the court, as there had been no complaints made against Anne throughout her reign. However, it is important to understand that Anne had garnered a large number of enemies at court, among the general public and abroad. Many were unsympathetic to her situation, regarded her as a glorified mistress, disliked her association with the Reformation, and some remained loyal to Catherine. Furthermore, her failure to produce the male child she promised cemented the idea that this marriage too had been illegitimate. Henry, notorious for his suspicion and paranoia, refused to see Anne. Furthermore, Henry frequently acted on the advice of those closest to him, and it didn't take any factual evidence to convince him of his wife's guilt. Anne was accused of adultery with 5 men, including court musician Mark Smeaton, whom Anne was friendly with, Sir Henry Norris, groom of the stool, Sir Francis Weston, and William Brereton. Furthermore, Anne was charged with adultery and incest with her brother George. The trial was swift and the evidence lacklustre, much of which relied heavily on witness testimonies and suspicion. Anne was convicted of high treason. She and all 5 of the accused men were condemned to death. Anne's former admirer, Thomas Wyatt, was imprisoned in the Tower of London, where on the 17th of May 1536 he witnessed the executions of the 5 condemned men. 2 days later, on the morning of the 19th of May, Anne Boleyn was taken to the scaffold, where, by mercy of the king, she was granted a beheading from an expert French swordsman. Anne was around 35 years old. Anne's last words were as follows: "Good Christian people, I have not come here to preach a sermon, I have come here to die. For according to the law and by the law I am judged to die. and therefore I will speak nothing against it. Anne went to her death with outstanding courage and dignity, and on the 30th of May, Henry married his latest love interest, Jane Seymour. Anne's short life was filled with passion, excitement, learning and optimism. Her impact on English history and her unjustifiable death are still felt today. Anne faced death with the same courage she encountered anything else in life, and she, like her contemporaries, understood the volatility and dangers of court. However, it is clear that Anne underestimated her position and her husband. Never before had an English king set aside his queen in favour of another, nor had he contemned his queen. Anne made a number of enemies in her quest to marry Henry, and failed in her duty to produce the long-desired male heir. If a son had been born, there would have been no question as to the legitimacy of her marriage, nor her rightfulness as queen. Furthermore, although Anne was raised among the nobility and spent most of her life in royal courts, there was no evidence that she intentionally hunted Henry to secure the throne. Therefore, it is clear that Anne's marriage was a marriage of love, born in part from Henry's desire to secure a male heir, and ended when his interest began to wane. Many hoped that Anne's death would result in a reversal of Henry's reforms, and that England would return to Catholicism. This, however, was not the case.